Good afternoon, readers. It's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf, and today I'm here to do a short review of Yes Sister, No Sister by Jennifer Craig. So this is a non-fiction memoir. It came out in 2002. It's been reprinted a few times since, and it's Jennifer Craig's story of training as a nurse, my life as a trainee nurse in 1950s Yorkshire. So I picked this up in a local charity shop. I live fairly close to where she trained. I work in healthcare myself, and I trained primarily in the hospital that she trained in as well. So that was why I picked it up, because I thought it would be really fascinating to see how different our experiences were kind of like nearly 60, 70 years apart. So, as I mentioned on my previous review video, my structure for reviews now is what went well, even better if, and surprising strength. So without further ado, let's get into that. What went well, I would say this is a really kind of beautiful, sweet, nostalgic account of training as a nurse in the 1950s. It's very heartwarming, it's very sweet. You can kind of tell that to an extent there's some rose-tinted glasses. There's a good amount of kind of like sense of humour though going into there, and kind of sense of like self-righteousness and yes, I want to make things better, which is quite endearing, I think. I felt that it captured the energy and the atmosphere of the hospital at the time, and particularly the kind of the interrelationships between staff, like the laughs between the housemen and the sisters, the hierarchy, the status kind of situation from the student nurse going up until this covers until she becomes a ward sister, which was one of well, still is one of the higher roles as a nurse within the hospital, like working clinically. Now you might call it a charge nurse, because obviously we have more of a balance of male and female nurses now. And I did find that I read it really quickly. I was very engrossed in it. Even better if, this is an interesting one. So there is a chapter in here that I found really gripping and very surprising, which is about a bomb exploding in the centre of Leeds. And I was reading it thinking, wow, this is quite intense, but also thinking, I'm really surprised that I've never heard of this before. So I finished the chapter and I looked it up, and I found out that it didn't really happen. And whether there was a similar event, or maybe there was there could have been a bus crash, for instance, and she just decided to turn it into a bomb incident for added drama. The clue for me was that she said it was an IRA bomb, and the IRA weren't really active in the 1950s, at least not in terms of large-scale bombing activities. So having found out that story was false, it really affected how I felt about other aspects of the book, and then reading other bits and kind of picking up on clues and things, I do get the feeling that quite a few bits in here are kind of borrowed memories, or not exactly entirely accurate. And if she'd said this is a fictionalized account of my life as a trainee nurse, I'd maybe mind it a little bit less, or if it was auto-fiction or fiction but just with a bit of personal experience thrown in, it would be different. But she does try and say I've tried to be faithful to the truth. Well, that's not entirely the case. The other part that I would say even better if would be just the writing in general. It's written in first person present tense. That's a particular mode of storytelling that I tend to prefer not to have. I kind of just think past tense, unless you've got a good reason not to. So I would have said even better if exactly the same but in past tense. And also some of the written depictions, particularly of accents. So for instance, there's a friend of hers who had a lisp, and she did feel the need to write that lisp into every sentence that character says. To me, that's not necessary. If you want to say that the character had a lisp, mention it, but then you don't have to kind of really lay it on every time. And that's maybe personal preferences. There's also some kind of representation of attitudes of the 1950s, in terms of some kind of racial language that's used that isn't particularly great in a book that came out in 2002. Obviously, I know she's trying to represent what things were like at the time, but times are different now. Surprising strength for me was the details of nursing procedures. So some of the chapters, particularly when she's training as a student nurse, some of the chapters start with a kind of I can't find any of them now, but laid out, here we go. Like exactly the details. This is how to set up a theatre set, for instance. So like all of the equipment that you need as a theatre nurse. There are others, like there was one that kind of laid out in detail how to do urine testing. For me, that was particularly fascinating because it's changed so much, but some things haven't. Like the general theatre set, a lot of that's very similar. How to do urine testing, I mean, this is talking about heating urine up over a Bunsen burner and adding different chemicals to it and checking like what colour it changes to, whereas now that's really as simple as like dipping a test strip into the sample and you'll have your result within a couple of minutes. So it was kind of fascinating to see how the nursing role has changed and how certain things are almost the same, like a bedpan is a bedpan, but some things like technology and science and our understanding of healthcare has kind of like moved us a long way on from. In a way, I kind of wish I'd read this book when I was training, so a few years ago, like 9 years ago I started training now, just to have that different perspective, and I definitely would recommend it to somebody going into healthcare who was interested in that kind of thing, just to kind of explore the background. And you know, we still have people that we say, oh, they're a bit old school, and seeing like where that came from, those kind of old school attitudes, so kind of like the strictness and the hierarchy, and even at the time she's like comparing the different ways of managing a ward and thinking about like, how do I want to manage a ward and how do I want to make my ward an engaging, stimulating place for student nurses and comfortable place for patients, rather than sticking to kind of rigidity and rules. I would most likely compare this to A Very Private Diary, and I can't remember who wrote that, but that is the diary of a nurse who trained and worked during the Second World War. So similar era, quite different experience in terms of nursing during the war being a bit more extreme, but quite similar descriptions of, you know, what being a nurse was like kind of in the middle of the 20th century. So yeah, I had fun with this, with the exception of some doubts over the veracity of all of it. I would recommend it if that's your kind of thing and if that's your subject area that you're interested in. It's a light read, it's an easy read, it's an enjoyable read. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I'll speak to you soon.